In the last few years, whenever I discuss with CXOs or CEOs, one topic is for sure coming back multiple times: digital transformation. Not only we as individuals generate data, a massive amount is also created across the value chain of any industry. During a manufacturing process, for example, factories are equipped with sensors that continuously assess or track the performance of every machine.
Disruption is nothing new. In fact, disruption is arguably a natural process product of market economies.
We want to go deeper on a narrower set of technology trends we saw in the most recent years.
Processing technology, communication technology, and other digital technologies are moving very fast in time. Our goal in this course is to give you the foundational elements to understand and keep up with that pace. Most importantly, we will help you charter your very own digital transformation program.
It consists of a few key building blocks for a company to be successful in digital transformation.
Welcome to the course, and I hope you enjoy this course.
I'm looking forward to seeing you there. In the last few years, whenever I discuss with CXOs or CEOs, one topic is for sure coming back multiple times: digital transformation. Not only we as individuals generate data, a massive amount is also created across the value chain of any industry. During a manufacturing process, for example, factories are equipped with sensors that continuously assess or track the performance of every machine.
Disruption is nothing new. In fact, disruption is arguably a natural product of market economies.
We want to go deeper on a narrower set of technology trends we saw in the most recent years.
Processing technology, communication technology, and other digital technologies are moving very fast in time. Our goal in this course is to give you the foundational elements to understand and keep up with that pace. Most importantly, we will help you charter your very own digital transformation program.
It consists of a few key building blocks for a company to be successful in digital transformation.
Welcome to the course, and I hope you enjoy this course.
I'm looking forward to seeing you there. I'm looking forward to seeing you there.
It consists of a few key building blocks for a company to be successful in digital transformation.
Welcome to the course. And I hope you enjoy this course.
I'm looking forward to seeing you there. In the last few years, whenever I discuss with CXOs or CEOs, one topic is for sure coming back multiple times: digital transformation. Not only we as individuals generate data, a massive amount is also created across the value chain of any industry. During a manufacturing process, for example, factories are equipped with sensors that continuously assess or track the performance of every machine.
Disruption is nothing new. In fact, disruption is arguably a natural product of market economies.
We want to go deeper on a narrower set of technology trends we saw in the most recent years.
Processing technology, communication technology, and other digital technologies are moving very fast in time. Our goal in this course is to give you the foundational elements to understand and keep up with that pace. Most importantly, we will help you charter your very own digital transformation program.
It consists of a few key building blocks for a company to be successful in digital transformation.
Welcome to the course. And I hope you enjoy this course.
I'm looking forward to seeing you there. Hello and welcome again. You are now starting the introductory module. Our first goal here is to build a common understanding of the basic concepts behind the phenomenon of digital transformation. So we'll go back to the technological foundations, understanding really what makes digital technology so unique and difficult to apprehend. What makes it different from other technology-led advancements we saw, for example, in the 18th century with the first industrial revolution. You will first see that we can all boil it down to three fundamental laws about the unusual improvements in how digital information can be processed, communicated, and stored. In fact, when we track each one of those, they interestingly all follow the same exponential acceleration pattern. So we will start there, and then we will discuss the impact this has on the business environment. And we will do so from two sides. First, the impact on traditional business architecture of whole industries. In other words, how links between different economic agents are evolving across the value chain. Second, the impact on individual companies, looking at how revenue and profitability are affected by technology investments.
Innovation and technological change are central to human progress. They are a hallmark of market economies. They can also be disruptive to the status quo. As Aman mentioned, we highlight the exponential growth of digital technology and hence its disruptive potential. Now we will share some relatively recent examples of how digital innovation and technological change have affected industries and individual companies. You'll hear from the executive leadership of Pitney Bowes, a U.S. company who provided mailing services for decades, then adapted its strategy over time to grow into an international e-commerce business. Digital transformation is a process involving many building blocks and people within a company. As such, it's a journey for Pitney Bowes, and it could be for your company too.
But has also fully transformed the business world. digital information management.
Ơi, khả năng lưu trữ sẽ trở nên không tốt hơn mà còn rẻ hơn.
Isn't it fascinating how fast technology is evolving over time? When I was a kid, no one around me had a cell phone. We had one landline, only reserved for important or urgent uses. We listened to FM radio and recorded music on audio cassettes. Internet was still a theoretical idea at that time. We had online courses like this, but only in science fiction books. And now, not that many years later, everyone has a smartphone. We shop, we chat, we play, and we learn online. We cannot imagine our lives without internet. Within 15-20 years, digital has not only changed our personal lives, but has also fully transformed the business world. And no industry was immune. But before talking about this evolution, let's go back in time, few centuries actually. I want to share with you an old legend about the game of chess. Not only because chess is the strategist's preferred game, but because the story around the game creation will help us understand what digital is all about. Surprising, isn't it? So, once upon a time, there was an Indian king, a fighter, who went into many battles. One day, coming back from an exhausting fight, he learned that he lost his son in the field. He felt immense sadness and decided to withdraw into his castle. This lasted for months, then years, until one of his subjects, named Lahore Sesa, offered him a chessboard. The king liked the game so much that he decided to grant the man whatever he asks for. Sesa kindly and humbly explained that he would like to have 1 grain of rice for the first square of the chessboard, 2 grains for the second square, 4 grains for the third, then 8 grains, and so on until the 64 squares are exhausted. Before telling you the end of the story, I want you to estimate how much rice did Sesa ask for. First, without doing any actual calculation. What is your intuitive guess? Would it be as heavy as a soccer ball, for example? A dairy cow? Or a Boeing 747 fully loaded? You can pause for a few seconds to really see in your mind what is the intuitive answer. Now, if you do the calculation, you would see it was about 2 multiplied by 10 to the power of 19 grains, which is in the same order of magnitude as the total Earth biomass. Well, I cheated a little bit on the options. But the reality is, almost everyone's intuition would have been massively underestimating the amount. This is because our minds are more adapted to estimating linear change than exponential change. Linear change is when we move from 1 to 2 to 3, or to spice it up, from 2 to 4 to 6. At step number n, we are at 2 multiplied by n. This, our intuition can estimate pretty accurately. Exponential change, however, is when at step number n, we are at 2 to the power of n. So we move from 1 to 2 to 4 to 8, 16, 32, 64. Because our intuition doesn't handle this representation, we have a way to show it. We call it a logarithmic scale, or log scale for short. In this representation, the vertical axis itself goes from 1 to 2 to 4, doubling every step. In this representation, when you see a line, it means you have an exponential growth. The kind of growth Sesa has asked for, after all. For those who are interested to hear the end of the story, well, there are two versions. One where the king rewards the clever ask, reasonably, and one where, well, Caesar doesn't live very long. Why start with this story? Because interestingly, digital technology in the last few decades has progressed just in the same way as the number of grains along the chessboard, exponentially. To see that, we will boil the progress down to three fundamental laws that made all that possible. These laws are addressing the core concepts, the core aspects of digital information management: processing, communication, and storage. Let's start with Moore's law. What this law says is that every 18 months, your computer will have twice as much power to process information. Originally, it was formulated slightly differently. It says that on a given silicon chip, every 18 months, you can double the amount of transistors you fit in there. The reality is this law in this original formulation is being challenged, because the more transistors you fit within this surface, at some point, you get to such a high density that quantum effects take place and stop the way the processor is designed to work. My response to this is to say it is a temporary challenge, not a permanent one. We can change the way we design the chips from 2D to 3D. We can change the material we use. Instead of silicon, use graphite. Or even we can radically change the approach and go to quantum computing. The second law you should remember is called Potter's law. It states that the amount of data communicated through a single optical fiber doubles every 9 months. If we plot the typical speeds in megabytes per second on a log scale again, we see a straight line, which means an exponential increase over the years. There's a variation of this law for other communication media, whether wireline, like ADSL, VDSL, or wireless, like 3G, LTE, and more recently 5G. The third law is called Crater's law. This law looks at hard drive storage capacity and states that the amount of data stored per centimeter square of a hard drive will double every 13 months. At least this was the case in the late 90s and early 2000s, when Mark Crater formulated his observation. A hard drive will double every 13 months. At least this was the case in the late 90s and early 2000s, when Mark Crater formulated his observation. Crater's law. This law looks at hard drive storage capacity and states that the amount of data stored per centimeter square of a hard drive will double every 13 months. At least this was the case in the late 90s and early 2000s, when Mark Crater formulated his observation. The trend has actually slowed down to double every 16 or 17 months. But anyway, this remains faster even than Moore's law. Maybe some of you remember the large blocks, almost the size of CPUs in the early 2000s, which even required us to plug in a power supply. And this all to store half a terabyte or a terabyte of data. Now, an external terabyte storage device is 1 centimeter thick, the size of a passport. Of course, these laws describe the theoretical technology potential. Only part of that potential goes into performance improvement for the mass market devices. The other part, however, will go into consumer cost reductions, so that computers, internet connection, and storage capacity become not only better, but also cheaper and cheaper. This has strong implications on the business world that we will discuss in the next video. But before that, let's reflect on what this means for our understanding of digital technology itself. Let's go back to our legend. The king knew that Caesar has asked for a lot of rice. However, his mind was not capable of capturing the magnitude of how the grain add up over the chessboard. For us, it is the same with exponential advancement of technology. We know that technology develops rapidly. However, as the human intuition is tuned to seeing linear developments, we tend to always underestimate the progress. It is not surprising, therefore, that companies also tend to underestimate or even be completely blind to the impact of digital technology. If companies develop linearly and technology evolves exponentially, we see a gap between the two, a gap between the company's actual value delivery and what would be possible technology-wise. And this gap is widening very quickly over time. The gap is often filled by innovative startups using technology to satisfy customer needs in a very different way, a way incumbent players were unable to see, or even worse, saw and couldn't fully understand. Companies like Kodak, Nokia, or Blockbuster paid a heavy price for this tendency to underestimate the trend. And you will see in details how this happened in the next module. What is it that we should take away from this session? First, the three exponential laws. The exponential increase of processing power, communication bandwidth, and storage capacity are the technological foundation of today's digital transformation. Second, our minds are tuned to seeing and predicting linear developments. Therefore, the first challenge that both individuals and companies need to overcome is one of perception, of understanding how digital technology is evolving. And last but not least, a gap tends to appear between how companies evolve and the technology potential. This gap is often filled by startups that come to disrupt incumbent players. In the last video, we have talked about the exponential evolution of digital technology and how this can be the foundation of a massive change for individual organizations. Now, let's go. go one step further and look at how business architecture as a whole has been transforming in the recent years. What I mean by business architecture is how players in an industry are organized to deliver a certain value add to the end users. This includes competitors, suppliers, and players from adjacent industries. How do they interact together and who do they interact with? Industry architecture plays a huge role in determining a given company's structure, processes, and ultimately its business strategy. Historically, the architecture that we often use to describe how businesses organize in a given industry was a value chain, a vertically integrated one. In this model, an industry can be seen as a succession of many suppliers, producers, and distributors. As a whole, they transform raw input to market-ready material. All that one step at a time. A company would typically integrate multiple steps in the value chain to become a member of an oligopoly with a couple of other vertically integrated competitors. Vertical integration was the right strategic answer to managing the flow of goods and information. There were two reasons for that. First, transaction costs were high. A company requires lots of resources and time to orchestrate its value chain, to coordinate with multiple suppliers, distributors, to figure out what is the best price or the right quality standards. Therefore, less transactions along the value chain meant lower costs and faster time to market. The second reason is that in many industries, competitive advantage was driven by scale. The more phones a company makes, for example, the more their experience translates into efficiency and the more profitable they become. You may notice that many of those reasons are about information accumulation, information exchange, and information processing. And this is where digital technology has changed very quickly over the years. If you remember the three fundamental laws from the previous video, we have described how some of the technological progress is passed on to the users as cost reduction. So it became cheaper and cheaper to store, process, and communicate information in digital form. In practical terms, it became exponentially cheaper for companies to directly check the inventory of their third-party distributors through an ERP integration, for example, or to instantly compare prices between suppliers through an online auction portal. These are all examples of decline in transaction cost. It impacted virtually any industry you can think of. And as a major consequence of that, links in the vertically integrated value chain became looser and started to break up. This way, you end up with different layers fulfilling the same functions as before in the industry, but this time each layer contains several independent players interacting with each other independently and interacting with the rest of the layers. This independence and interoperability allowed each layer to evolve with its own key success factors. Some layers were scale sensitive, so the players naturally consolidated sometimes to the level of building a monopoly. Other layers needed more innovation and agility, so players remained fragmented. Let's see how this story of deconstruction has unveiled in the telecommunication industry as an example. In the 20th century, telephony was offered as an end-to-end service. A single company will physically wire the homes, manufacture the handsets, and operate the switching board. The first stacking of the industry happened after a long legal battle that allowed customers, and I know this will surprise you, to use a phone not manufactured by their network service provider. Technologically, this was possible in the early 20s, but the legal battle was only settled in the mid-50s. Then in the 80s, a second stacking happened. Different service providers could rely on a common infrastructure operated by a third party, which benefited from a lot of scale. Then in the 90s, with the emergence of internet, new services started to be offered by new players on top of the service providers. Not only voice communication, but also information services, entertainment, and very, very soon, e-commerce. This deconstruction of the value chain allowed players in each layer to compete on what matters for their specific functionality. At the bottom, the key success factor was scale. Fewer players, but enough scale to optimize investment and utilization of very expensive assets. There was no benefit in having 5 players duplicating the fiber wiring in a city when one was enough. The top layer, however, is about innovation. New services can emerge and try their luck with customers. They then either prosper or die without any impact on the lower stacks. This is the beauty of the stacked architecture. Over time, it has even allowed new business models to attack the bread and butter of incumbent service providers. Companies like Skype or WhatsApp, for example, have completely destroyed the short messaging market value. They are now eating the industry voice revenue and pressuring the incumbent players' cost structure. The telecommunication industry was far from being the only one deconstructed. Banking, or even the good old energy industry are other examples. What did that mean for incumbents? It meant that their competitive landscape has changed dramatically. In addition to the traditional competitors, incumbents can now be attacked by smaller players that target only specific layers in the industry stack. Let's take an example. Traditionally, telcos were worried about other telcos. Today, they are worried about WhatsApp, as we have mentioned, or Netflix. Both players use the telecommunication infrastructure, but they use it in a way that destroys a traditional value pool of the infrastructure operators themselves. Let me recap the most important messages of this session. Technological evolution changed the traditional model of business architecture from a vertically integrated value chain to a stack-based structure. The stack structure reflects the fact that players can compete on different key success factors in different layers. Scale at the bottom, innovation at the top. In this new model, new players can disrupt incumbents by attacking only a specific portion of the whole value chain.
We have explored how technology impacts business strategy. We are now fortunate to have with us Philip Evans. Philip is a senior advisor to BCG and a BCG Fellows. He's an ex-senior partner of BCG. Philip has done many conferences convened by people like Bill Gates, World Economic Forum, and Code Conference. Philip also has a TED Talk online that you can check it out. Philip has co-authored a book called Blown to Bits that basically explores how the economies of information impact strategy. Philip is also known as one of the Lord of Strategy by Walter Kishel. Philip, welcome.
Thank you.
We have already introduced the three fundamental laws of technologies. Can you describe a bit how does this impact our business strategy?
Absolutely. The most fundamental impact which information technology has is to radically transform our ability to transact. Specifically, it massively lowers transaction costs. This has enormous implications for strategy because economic organization is fundamentally around economizing on transaction costs. So therefore, if transaction costs become lower, there is less to economize on, and therefore in some fundamental sense there is a lesser need for economic organization. Fundamentally, markets substitute for traditional organizational structures. What that means, therefore, is that businesses which have been defined by a traditional value chain discover that because of transformations in internet technology, that value chain can be broken up. To use the phrase that we coined, it can be deconstructed.
Just on the point of deconstruction, in the earlier video,
To use the phrase that we coined, it can be deconstructed.
Just on the point of deconstruction, in the earlier video we have shown a deconstruction that affected the telecommunication industry, but I'm sure it's applicable across all industry. Can you describe another industry that's affected by this deconstruction?
Yes, absolutely. I think a very good contemporary example is the media industry. The media industry was traditionally defined by a set of vertically integrated value chains for example, a newspaper or a magazine or a television station. And each of those value chains had components which would include the creation of content, the encoding of that content, for example, by a reporter or by a television camera, the distribution of that content through printing presses or through television broadcasting stations, the consumption or decoding of the content, for example, by a TV set, and then ultimately, of course, the consumption of that content by the viewer. Those value chains were similar, but they were separate, and these were largely separate businesses. Today, of course, thanks to technology, that view of the world is entirely obsolete. Multiple kinds of content can be encoded in many different ways, but ultimately end up in a format that can be distributed over the internet. The internet is then itself distributed via wire or via wireless. It is decoded on devices such as computers or cell phones, and thus consumed by the end user. In that world, there is really no difference between video, audio, reporting, fiction, entertainment. They are just different types of content distributed through the same channel. So what had been a set of separate, vertically integrated, parallel media industries instead becomes a horizontally layered multimedia industry in which all kinds of content are distributed in essentially interoperable ways.
Okay, when you talk about horizontal layer, I guess we can call it the stack. And if you look within the stack, there is this layer which is the platform layers. These days, we see a lot of values being captured by players that are very strong in the platform layer. To take a few examples like Amazon, Airbnb, Uber, can you describe this phenomena?
Well, a corollary of the logic that we just discussed is that each of these newly emergent layers can have their own economics, and those economics can be very different. Some might be scale-intensive manufacturing businesses, which therefore will evolve in accordance with those kinds of economics. Perhaps, for example, nationally dominant players providing services to their region. Another layer might actually fragment. For example, the production of content on YouTube is something which millions and millions of people are economically able to produce. And therefore that industry, instead of being concentrated in a few television studios, gets fragmented. The layer that you are talking about is a really critical one, because whenever you have a large population consuming and or producing, they need some kind of a platform on which to find each other, on which to interact. And that is the role of Google, the role of Facebook, the role of YouTube, the role of Airbnb, and so forth. Those businesses are characterized by two things. First, they have very strong network effects, which means that everybody prefers to be on the larger network, and therefore the larger network gets larger. And secondly, they have essentially zero marginal costs. Once you've set the system up, you can add customers and you can add producers at essentially zero cost. The result is those businesses have a tendency to become monopolies, not just locally, but globally. And those global monopolies are, of course, extraordinarily profitable. The result is, compared with the old vertically integrated industry, a pattern where you have some parts of the business becoming a lot more profitable, some parts becoming a lot less profitable. Some parts become extremely expensive, some parts actually become free. The economics of the layers separate because of their interoperability.
Okay, so if we play this forward, in your opinion, what will it look like 5 to 10 years from now?
Well, I think that we're going to see a different pattern in different businesses. There's no reason to believe that every industry will evolve the same way. So therefore what we are seeing is the evolution of this stacked architecture in many different businesses. We're seeing some evolutions driven by things like deregulation or re-regulation, forcing various kinds of stacked architecture. We are seeing local champions striving hard to protect their local position against global players. So I don't believe there's any single simple generalization about how these structures will evolve. And I do believe that the strategy pursued by individual companies or groups of companies can have a huge effect in shaping the way the world is evolving. That, of course, is why strategy is such an interesting topic.